Hi there. Gotten quite a few comments about winterizing hives. The past 3 or 4 videos I've done have dealt with how I wrap my hives and condensing hives. And I've kind of said, hey, go ahead and look at some of the stuff of Étienne Tardif or Paul Kelly at the University of Guelph. And then I got a few people that said, why don't you just explain it real quick? And I thought, okay, I'm just gonna do a real quick explanation. But before we even get going, I need to tell you, I am in no way an expert on this. I really have followed the research, and the research has led me to believe and then see that this is the way I like to winterize my hives. It's quite unconventional. I learned early on that the best thing to do was make sure you had tons of ventilation in your hive, and that was everything that your bees needed to be happy and healthy through the winter. Well, then I started to discover that really wasn't what was helping them. I think it was costing them more energy than it was worth. So condensing hives. Basically, a condensing hive is a hive with little or absolutely really no ventilation in it in the winter. What does that do? Well, it does a couple of things. If you have no ventilation in the hive, the bees in this space here will generate lots and lots and lots of heat and moisture, because they're in a small cluster, and especially because I'm running single deeps, there's not as much to heat up. Double deeps, it's the same thing. They probably have honey above them right now, but they're gonna work their way up through the course of the winter. But when they generate that heat and that moisture, it rises up, and since I have insulation somewhere around, like overdone, R30, R40 in insulation above, that keeps the top of the hive and the roof of the hive above the dew point. And if the temperature in the hive on the roof is above the dew point, moisture can't rise up, hit that, and form into moisture, which, as everybody says, it will rain down on your bees and they will die. Well, they will, if you've got a cold upper half of the hive. A warm roof won't let that happen. What happens with that is then the heat hits, it races down the side of the hive. It races down the side of the hive. It goes down the side of the hive. I'm getting all worked up there, aren't I? It goes down the side of the hive till it gets down to the lowest parts. And in the lower part, down in here, it's going to be cooler. Cooler enough that it is below the dew point, and that means that it will condense. Condensing hives. That water then condenses down here, and the bees then are able to use that water, because they need water as much in the winter as they do in the summer. They can use that water to hydrate themselves. But that never says, well, aren't you going to get mold? No, not really, because most of it just drips off or the bees consume it. Here's a couple of the benefits of this whole process. If you're doing condensing hives, your bees tend to use less energy, because the hive in itself is warmer, so they don't have to work as hard to keep the hive warm. Look at it this way. It's the middle of winter. You've got a 2-story house, and you're kind of living all over it. If you're running double deeps, could be a single deep, doesn't matter. But it's the middle of winter, so you say, I need ventilation in this house. So you wide open the front door, then you go upstairs and you open a bunch of windows so that you can get flow through the house for ventilation. Same thing with a beehive. Well, that's all well and good, but what's that going to do to your furnace? The furnace is going to have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, 10 times as hard, the colder it gets, to keep the house warm. So you're burning energy. Bees, it's the same thing. If you're ventilating the hives, you're pulling all sorts of cold air through there, and they huddle into a tight little mass, and they try to keep as warm as they possibly can. And that burns a ton of energy. Condensing hives, in a lot of ways, they probably aren't even that tight of a cluster. They don't need to be, because they are generating enough heat and it's staying within their hive. Here's another interesting thing that happens. And again, Tardif has done a lot of, he just had an article in American Bee Journal about this, and I was just watching a YouTube video that he did that talks about the CO2 in a hive. Part of the reason that people always said for years you got to ventilate your hive is to ventilate that CO2 out of there. Well, now we're discovering that maybe there's something a little bit different in that. The bees are generating a huge amount of CO2, enough CO2 to kill any of us. But for them, it slows down their metabolic rate. And it slows down their metabolic rate to a point that they're just not consuming a ton of energy. What I found is that my condensing hives, I put them to bed in the winter with probably about 35 pounds of honey, somewhere in that neighborhood. I like about 35 to 40 pounds of honey. I was weighing out most of my hives last year in the springtime, and they'd only burned through 20 pounds of honey and hadn't even touched candy boards I put on them. So they're just not consuming that much food. But I will also tell you, they were gangbusters. I was putting supers on hives in February because they were busting at the seams. So it really helped considerably. Here's the other thing, there's research that really starting to show that CO2 is impactful to Varroa mite. Now, there's been no real solid conclusions, but I know that the studies are going on. I'm hoping to hear something at the North American Honeybee Expo this January that has a little bit more on that research. But the things that I've been reading is that CO2 is having impacts and causing Varroa to die off in the hive. So you're coming out of the spring with even cleaner bees, which is exactly what you want because you're building drone. Those drones aren't impacted, you don't have disease, all the good things that go with it. So that's the basics of a condensing hive. There's not a lot to it. You're just basically letting the bees do what bees do. Let me kind of leave you with this and think about, I try to get the bees back to doing what bees have done for millions of years, living in the wild, mostly in hollowed out cavities, which tends to be tree hives. And in a tree hive, there's no other choice than to do condensing hives because there is no place for ventilation. And on the sides of a tree, you've got somewhere around maybe an R5 or an R6. So the way that I'm doing hives, the way that people condense hives is replicate what happens in a tree. So you put like R5, R6 on the side, and in a tree, above the cavity, you've got what? You've got R infinity. It goes as high as the tree goes. So to put that insulation on the top replicates what bees do in nature. So that's the basics of condensing hives. But again, I'm not an expert at it. I just know that it works for me. And I know that it's working for a lot of people, and more studies that are being conducted are showing that it's a beneficial way to go. So there you have it. That's kind of what I know about condensing hives. I appreciate you watching. I really appreciate if you'd subscribe if you have not. That means a lot to us. Hit that like button. You like that too. Comments, please. Let's talk about it. It's a new way of thinking of an old way that bees have taken care of themselves for years and years. So we know what we know and we'll do what we can. You guys take care. See you soon. Thanks.